Good morning, everybody. I'm Brian Francis. I'm President and CEO of Lumen Strategies, and we appreciate you joining us today for this webinar, Childcare, a Business Issue. Many of you have been with us before. I want to make some quick introductions of my team. I've got Brittany Burton, who is our online learning strategist, and Sarah Principe, our advocacy strategist. They will be monitoring the chat for any questions that you have and probably throwing some links in that you may find useful as we go. Um, Thank you again for joining us today. Some of you have been with us before for these webinars, and so you've heard this spiel before, but I'll go ahead and give it again. Lumen Strategies helps chambers of commerce build A+ advocacy programs through both our one-on-one consulting and our signature online advocacy framework program. As part of our mission to help chambers become better advocates for their members, we also host these regular webinars to address different ways that your chamber can really get involved in the public policy area. And traditionally, these sessions have been more tactical. We've talked about how to navigate the 2024 election. We've talked about hosting candidate forums, raising money through your advocacy program, and all of those are available on our YouTube channel if you missed those and want to go back and take a look at them. Today, we're going in a slightly different direction. Today, we are going in a policy direction as we work with our clients. An issue that comes up time and time again, that is a relatively new issue for the business community, is childcare. And we decided it might be helpful for folks to hear a little bit more about the impact of childcare on the workforce and why this is an issue that businesses are starting to care about. Hopefully, give you some facts and figures to arm you as you talk to policymakers and give you some ideas of different policy proposals that are occurring around the state. To help us with that today, I brought in an expert. Erica Palmer-Smith is the executive director of NC Child. It's North Carolina's only organization that represents the broad range of issues affecting our children. And the first thing, and maybe first takeaway for you today that I'd like you to think about, I would say that NC Child and the business community probably have never worked on an issue together in the past. And there might have been a few here and there, but traditionally, the issues don't align. And so your first takeaway is when an important issue comes up, look for your allies no matter where they may be. And Erica's great at this. She previously served as the executive director of Care for Carolina, which was the business alliance for Medicaid expansion. And so she really saw, as North Carolina worked to pass Medicaid expansion, the power of bringing together organizations that maybe don't traditionally work together, but have common cause. She's got 2 degrees from Appalachian State University here in North Carolina. And I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm just going to turn it over to Erica. Erica, thank you for joining us today. Tell us why childcare is a business issue.
Thank you, Brian. We've been huge fans of Lumen Strategies over here at NC Child and the work that they do around early childhood education advocacy. So thrilled to be here, thrilled to meet all of you. I'm going to pull up some slides here in a moment. So I'm excited to talk with you all about childcare, but I think, especially for these purposes, what we're really talking about is workforce shortages and how solving families' childcare issues can provide a pool of labor for business. So, NC Child, you can see our mission is to advocate for policies that help improve the lives of all North Carolina children. Um, but as I go over these slides today, I want to just note I did not create these slides. We have an incredible research director, Neil Harrington, who actually came to us from the Department of Commerce, where he was doing a lot of childcare work for them. And so he actually prepared these slides, but unfortunately, due to a family emergency, he was not able to be here today. So I have his slides. I'm going to be going through those, but just want to note they did not come from me. But we have a lot of data to go over in the next 20 minutes or so. Um, and quick out, excuse me.
Discovered Georgia, we're out there, but I know that your mom cleared out a bunch of.
So first we'll excuse me, I'm sorry, I got a little bit off track there. I'm going to go over a quick outline of what we're going to talk about. So first, I'll talk about how childcare impacts a parent's ability to work. And then I'll talk about how that restriction on parents' labor supply reverberates through the rest of our economy. And finally, I'll talk about the issues in childcare that lead to these economic issues and some policy solutions that can help address it. And I'm working off two screens here because once again, I'm using someone else's work to present. So if you will be patient with me. Um, so to start, we know we have a workforce shortage across the country. And this has been especially the case since about mid 2021, when the number of job openings at businesses across the nation started again to exceed the number of people looking for work. So, this tight labor market can make it difficult for businesses to find people to fill open positions and can limit their productivity and economic output, which I'm sure all of you have dealt with to some extent over the past several years. Now, in North Carolina and across the country, tight labor markets like this are likely here to stay, given long term demographic trends. So, even if labor markets and the economy cools off and unemployment rises, an aging population means that more folks will reach retirement age and drop out of the labor force. And while population growth, we're seeing more people moving into some areas. North Carolina is having a lot of folks come into the area, for example. That's also being replaced by folks retiring. And so what we've actually seen is that we've had slower rates of migration overall into the workforce. And all of this points towards a new normal of tighter labor markets, which means more hiring difficulties for employers. So we have these problems in our workforce, not enough workers to meet business labor needs, and they're really exacerbated by things like childcare issues that limit a parent's ability to work. Many new or recent parents out there work before having kids, but difficulty accessing and affording childcare in their communities makes it difficult for folks to continue working in the first few years of their kid's life. Data from the current population survey shows us that adults ages 25 to 54 with a child under 5 in the home have lower labor force participation rates than the same age adults without kids. Workers ages 25 to 54 are what's called prime age workers. And so this means that a smaller share of prime age workers with kids are working or looking for work than their counterparts without kids. In fact, there were about 631,000 fewer prime age adults with kids in the national labor force in 2023 than there were in 2019 before the pandemic. So, at the most extreme, parents drop out of the labor force altogether if they cannot find childcare. But on the other side of that, parents with access to services can still periodically miss work due to disruptions from providers, affordability, or other issues that can temporarily disrupt access to care. And many of you, I'm sure, have experienced this in your own life, and so when we look at this on a more macro level, it becomes really significant. A North Carolina Chamber survey from last year reemphasizes this for North Carolina. About 60% of parents with kids under 5 had to miss work because of a childcare problem. Parents' inability to work or disruption to work from childcare issues in turn has made more negative impacts on other businesses that need workers, and it limits their economic activity. Because right off the bat, if a business has a worker for years and then suddenly loses that worker because of a childcare issue, even if it's just for a few years, that firm has to then turn around and spend money recruiting, hiring, and training a new employee. All the while, they likely aren't producing as much as they otherwise probably would because now they're short staffed. If we can solve childcare issues for families out there, we can ease workforce shortages in the state and across the nation and add to the labor pool that businesses can hire from. So, all of this adds up to a big economic impact. For one, issues in childcare can lower worker productivity at work for parents if they're employed. And I want to apologize for the screen. This was created on another computer. I was not able to do updates. So if it looks a little bit off, I apologize for that. That is usually not the image that NC Child puts out. So please have all kinds of grace. Um, so um, so again, for one, issues in childcare can lower worker productivity at work if parents are employed. which limits a business's economic output, either through a parent that's forced to drop out of the labor force, or even if they stay employed, they're not going to be as productive if they're dealing with a childcare issue while at work, periodically missing work, or taking off because of childcare issues, or working from home while simultaneously trying to care for a child. Again, some of us may have experienced something very similar. I had a 2-year-old when COVID hit, and I'm sure others have had similar problems. So it also lowers the wages that parents can bring home, and the resources they have available to provide for their kids and stimulate other economic activity in the communities they live in. Now, this isn't on the slide, but parents dropping out of the labor force also impacts their ability to take advantage of early career advancements, which are really crucial for long-term wage earnings. And of course, there are long-term impacts on children's economic mobility and the future workforce because of a lack of childcare. We know that quality childcare is associated with better academic outcomes in school, higher wages later in life, better health outcomes in a child's lifetime, and less public health spending. For that matter, it even adds up to lower criminal activity as adults. So once again, all of this adds up. Some estimates at the national level suggest it costs the United States economy more than $1 billion per year from lost wages, lost business activity, and lost state and local tax revenue. NC Child is actually doing some work right now with the Department of Commerce, the North Carolina Chamber, and the U.S. Chamber Foundation to estimate the economic impact of the childcare crisis here in our state. That study will look at the impact on business productivity and output, tax revenue collections, individual worker impacts, and multiplied impacts through the rest of the economy. And once federal funding from the pandemic that's propped up the childcare industry over the last couple of years expires here in North Carolina this June, it's going to get a lot worse for us. So estimates suggest that in North Carolina, once the funding fully expires, it could lead to the closure of 1,800 providers across the state and threaten the childcare services of about 155,000 children in a worst-case scenario. At the national level, studies suggest that 70,000 providers could close across the country, and 3.2 million children could lose care. And that's also going to have a big impact on parents' earnings and business output, to the tune of about $400 million per year, each in North Carolina, and about $9 billion in lost wages nationally for parents, and about $10.6 billion in lost business activity. So that's a really big impact, but we know from the experience of the last few years that public support to providers can really help increase service availability and expand provider capacity, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes. It's just a matter of getting that support to providers and making sure childcare supply matches the amount demanded out there by parents who need it to continue working and providing for their families. All right, so that was a little bit about how childcare issues are worsening workforce issues here in North Carolina and across the country and limiting our economic output. But what exactly are the problems with childcare that policy can help address? So first, it's important to understand just how many workers have young kids that childcare issues can impact. So workers with children under the age of 5, the typical childcare age, make up of about 10.3% of the nation's total workforce, or about 17.2 million workers nationwide in 2023. As you can see, this has fluctuated a bit over the years, but is typically in the 10 to 11% of the labor force range. Notably, workers with young kids' share of the total workforce is down by about 0.5 percentage point from pre-COVID share. This equates to about 631,000 fewer workers. So this is largely due to workers with young children dropping out of the labor force and not returning over the last few years. So why does this happen? One of the reasons, and again, I apologize for the for the screen. One of the reasons parents of young kids could have dropped out of the labor force is the price of childcare. A lot of parents are really just getting priced out of the childcare market because it's so expensive. The cost of childcare has been rising rapidly for decades, more than doubling since 2000 and rising much more rapidly than the cost of other household essentials like groceries, housing, and all items in the Consumer Price Index. As you know, the Consumer Price Index is the government's typical inflation measure representing the standard basket of goods bought by the typical American consumer. And in the past few years, it has gotten worse. A recent report at the end of last year from Bank of America found that childcare prices nationally have risen by more than 35% since just a few years before 2019. It's 35%. This rising and high cost of childcare really stresses family incomes, leading some parents to stay home and take care of their child instead of working and devoting such a large portion of their paycheck just to pay for childcare. Nationally, center-based care for infants is about $15,000 per year in a standard large American county, which represents about 12.5% of the median household income of a married couple in the country, about 42% of the income of a typical single mom, and it's about 27% of the median income for single dads. It's not much cheaper for toddlers, around $12,500 per year on average, representing slightly smaller but still sizable shares of median household incomes for standard family structures. You can imagine that if you have 2 children in childcare at the same time, as many families do, this could quickly get even more unaffordable. For context, both of these price points are higher than the cost of in-state tuition at most public universities in the country. In North Carolina, average childcare prices far exceed the cost of in-state tuition at UNC Chapel Hill. So it's more expensive now to pay for a child's education in those first critical years of life than it is to pay for tuition at one of the best colleges that you can send your children to. And the sad reality is that many parents typically, they have 18 years to save for their child's college education, but not many people starting families are in a position to save for the cost of childcare for their child. The other big contributor to childcare problems in North Carolina is access. Simply put, there aren't enough spots at licensed childcare centers to meet the demands of families. As this chart shows, in North Carolina, limited licensed capacity at quality childcare centers can only serve about 70% of kids with both parents in their household in the labor force. Workforce issues at childcare centers themselves drive a lot of these accessibility and supply problems. Childcare providers have to meet strict student-to-teacher ratios, and many don't have enough staff to open up the amount of spots that parents in their community need. In North Carolina, childcare providers lost a lot of workers during COVID. They recovered a lot of those employees back over the last few years, but that recovery has been thanks in large part to federal support to providers that enabled them to offer higher wages for their workers. The American Rescue Plan Act included a childcare stabilization grant component that dispersed grants to states that then dispersed them to providers, offering childcare centers cash infusions for wage expenses and other fixed costs that have kept them afloat over the last few years. Those grants expired in September. Now, again, in North Carolina, our General Assembly reallocated some other federal funding to keep the compensation component open through June of this year in our state. But unless our General Assembly add more funding to the program before the end of this legislative session, we could see the North Carolina child care supply fall even more. Because these grants really helped employment at centers recover because wages are so low in the sector and providers' margins are really too thin to offer pay increases without public support or increasing costs on parents to bring more money in. These wage supports had such a big impact because it allowed providers to increase wages and be more competitive with other private businesses in a tight labor market. Childcare workers earn hourly wages of about $13 an hour in North Carolina. some of the lowest wages in the economy. We see similar rates across the nation. Right now, workers at big box stores and fast food chains are often being offered higher starting wages than childcare workers. And those types of jobs have much lower education and training requirements. So, because of the tight labor market we're in, childcare workers have many other higher paying options that they can turn to. Now, as you all know, the tight labor market means unemployment is really low, and anyone who wants a job can basically go out and find one right now. In February 2024, the most recent data, the US unemployment rate was at 4.2%, slightly lower than the state's rate and near record lows. North Carolina's unemployment rate was a little lower at 3.7%. As we covered earlier, firms usually have a lot of job openings they're trying to fill when unemployment rates are low. And as we've seen over the last few years, businesses increase wages to attract workers and to fill those positions, which many of you have probably dealt with in the labor shortages of the last few years. Now, this gives workers much more power in labor market decisions, especially low-wage workers, allowing them to move easily between jobs. Childcare employers often can't compete with the increased wage levels without increasing costs on parents or reducing slots available because the margins are so thin in the industry. So it's harder for childcare providers to fill open positions or expand their staff to serve more children without some extra support from elsewhere that enables them to raise wages, hire more workers, and serve more children without further increasing costs on parents. And in North Carolina, if we don't find more funding for the childcare industry this session, the unemployment gains that we've seen among providers in recent years are likely to disappear and will be serving even fewer parents. Great, so that's a brief overview of some of the issues we're seeing in childcare right now. And so I started off talking about how these issues impact parents' abilities to work. How do we solve it? How do we enable more providers to serve more families and allow parents to meet businesses' labor demands? So a few things that we saw here in our state that were helpful in this last session. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly so that I can give folks time to ask questions about some of these policies. But we were, oh goodness, trying to get back to the right side. So first, we decoupled private tuition payments from subsidized childcare market rates. That allowed providers to receive additional needed funds without having to raise the cost on private paying parents. We saw a subsidy rate increase closer to market levels at the 2021 market level. Many states still, they need to increase those rates just to get closer to the market rate of what we're actually seeing now. Previously, ours were at the 2018 level. So we did see an extension of our childcare stabilization grants. Again, a critically important policy in terms of making sure that providers are able to pay decent wages and keep their staff. And then we also passed a tri-share pilot program. And this would split the cost of childcare equally between workers, employers, and the state. Now, both Kentucky and Michigan have tri-share models in place, and they both found success in reducing the price of childcare for families. So what we're looking at next, we're trying to put in place a statewide subsidy floor to ensure that we see similar subsidy rates paid across all of North Carolina's 100 counties. So what we've actually found is we can have two counties neighboring each other that share similar workforces, and there can be a $700 difference between counties in terms of what they're receiving for subsidies. And so that's creating some childcare deserts in our state. And so that's one of the things that we're looking to fix. We also are working on extending those stabilization grants beyond June 2024, as I previously mentioned. And we are working toward free childcare for childcare workers. So Kentucky did this with federal funds a few years ago, and they've seen some really positive trends in provider capacity since then. It takes a big line item out of family budgets, which can total near $20,000 in some counties in our state, and incentivizes folks to take a lower paying job that they might not otherwise take. So I sped through that last section because I just wanted to make sure that folks had an opportunity to ask questions that they had about those policies. But those are some of the policies that we believe can be really impactful. Um, and with that, I will stop for any questions, and thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Erica. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll be happy to ask Erica. I'll make the observation, Erica obviously comes at this from a North Carolina perspective, and you heard a lot of what's going on in our state. Two things I would comment on with that. One is a lot of these issues and policy proposals that she talked about, while she talked specifically about North Carolina, they apply broadly across the country. And so some of the things we're working on here, there may be people working on, or your chamber may want to work on in your state and your community as well. The other thing I would say is not every state solution does apply broadly. And so I'll throw in too that we've seen elsewhere in the country that Erica did not mention. Pennsylvania extended their early child tax credit. In North Carolina, we are reducing the corporate income tax to zero. So there's not an opportunity to incent businesses through corporate tax credits because they're not paying corporate taxes. But if you're in a state with high corporate taxes, that might be a policy proposal you would pursue. Another one that's just getting off the ground, it required a constitutional amendment in the state of Texas, would allow childcare centers, would allow the local governments to exempt childcare facilities from local property taxes. Again, for constitutional reasons, probably not something we'll be looking at here in North Carolina, but is an interesting idea and one that your state might want to explore as well. So with that, do we have any questions within the chat?
We do not.
Okay. Well, Erica, I neglected to say this up front, but I really wanted to express my appreciation for you stepping in. As you mentioned, Neil unfortunately had to attend to some family matters here kind of the last second. And I can't imagine if I had to step into Sarah or Brittany's job without much time to prepare. I think you did a wonderful job with that. Would it be possible for you to share your slides with us so that we can send those out? And if you want to doctor them up a little bit to get to where you want them to be, we would certainly allow that.
Absolutely. I imagine that they were great on Anil's computer, and that yeah. But when I anyway, so I will take care of that, and then I will get those out to you later this week. And again, if anyone has any questions that come up later, we have a wonderful network across the country. We are happy to, connect folks with experts within other states that could help address some of the policy proposals that could be helpful there. So just let us know.
Yeah, Erica, you read my mind. That was going to be my next question. It was if we could help connect folks with organizations like yours in their state. And so we would certainly be happy to facilitate those introductions as well. Erica, thank you again for joining us today. For those of you on the call or joining by video later, thank you once again for joining us on this important topic. You can always find us at lumenstrat.com on the web or at advocacyframework.com. We would love to work with you if you're trying to take your chamber advocacy program to the next level, or if you don't have an advocacy program at all. We've worked with a number of chambers to really start from the ground up and build those, and would love the opportunity to do that as well. So until next time, thank you again for joining us. I'm Brian Francis from Lumen Strategies, and stay tuned for our next webinar.